In late 1936, inside a laboratory at the IG Farben complex in Leverkusen, Germany, a chemist named Gerhard Schrader was working on a problem that had nothing to do with war. He was trying to build a better pesticide, something that could kill the insects destroying German crops without bankrupting the farmers who grew them. Schrader had been experimenting with organophosphate compounds, a family of chemicals that attack the nervous systems of insects. One afternoon, a small drop of his latest formula spilled onto the lab bench. Within minutes, Schrader and his lab assistant started feeling dizzy. Their vision blurred, their chests tightened, and they could barely breathe. It took both of them nearly 3 weeks to fully recover. Schrader had no idea at the time, but that spill in a quiet German laboratory had just introduced the world to a substance roughly 500 times more toxic than cyanide, and the century that followed would be shaped by it in ways nobody could have predicted. It was 1903 when Gerhard Schrader was born in the small town of Bortfeld, near Braunschweig in northern Germany. He grew up during a period of food shortages and agricultural crisis across Europe, and those early years shaped his entire career. Schrader studied chemistry at the Braunschweig University of Technology and, after graduating, took a job with Bayer AG, which at the time operated as a division of IG Farben, one of the largest industrial conglomerates in the world. Yes, that Bayer, the same company that made aspirin. His mission was straightforward: develop insecticides that could protect German agriculture from pests like leaf lice and woolly aphids. He spent years working with organophosphate compounds, a class of chemicals that disrupted a critical enzyme in insect nervous systems called acetylcholinesterase. Under normal conditions, when a nerve cell fires a signal to a muscle, a chemical messenger called acetylcholine carries that signal across the tiny gap between nerve and muscle. Once the message is delivered, an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase swoops in and clears the acetylcholine away so the muscle can relax and get ready for the next instruction. Think of it like a switch. The acetylcholine turns the muscle on. The enzyme turns it back off. Organophosphates destroy that off switch. The acetylcholine keeps building up in the gap. The nerve keeps firing. The muscle keeps contracting. For an insect, that cycle ends in paralysis and death within seconds. And as Schrader was about to find out the hard way, that same mechanism worked just as efficiently on mammals, including humans. But the compound that spilled onto Schrader's lab bench on December 23, 1936, did something he had not prepared for. It worked on people. After he and his assistant recovered from the accidental exposure, their pupils constricted to pinpoints, they suffered chest tightness and severe shortness of breath, and their vision stayed blurry for days. Schrader reported the compound to the German military, as required by law at the time for any discovery with potential defense applications. The military took one look at the test results and pulled the project out of Schrader's hands entirely. They renamed his compound Tabun, from the German word for taboo, because its toxicity was so extreme that even discussing it openly was considered dangerous. And just like that, a pest control project became a weapons program. But Schrader kept working. And in 1938, while based at IG Farben's laboratory in Wuppertal-Elberfeld, he synthesized a second compound that was even more lethal. This one was twice as toxic to test animals as Tabun had been. It was colorless, odorless, and tasteless. You could not see it, smell it, or taste it. A single drop on exposed skin could kill a grown adult. The military designated it Substance 146. Later, it received the name that the world would come to know it by, an acronym built from the last names of the 4 scientists who led its development: Schrader, Ambros, Ritter, and von der Linde. Take the first letters. You get Sarin. So how deadly is Sarin, exactly? A lethal dose for an adult human is roughly 0.5 milligram. To put that in perspective, that is about the weight of a single grain of sand. You could fit a lethal dose on the tip of a ballpoint pen and still have room to spare. It can enter the body through the skin, through the eyes, or through the lungs if inhaled. Once inside, sarin does the same thing to a human nervous system that Schrader's original insecticides did to bugs, only faster and more violently. It locks onto acetylcholinesterase and shuts it down. Nerve signals start firing non-stop, and the body's muscles respond by contracting without end. The pupils shrink to pinpoints, a telltale sign that doctors later learned to recognize as the first indicator of nerve agent exposure. The victim starts drooling and tearing uncontrollably as every gland in the body fires at once. Then the muscles around the chest and the diaphragm seize, making it impossible to draw a breath, and the lungs begin filling with mucus and fluid. At high concentrations, death by suffocation can happen in under 60 seconds. There is literally no time for symptoms to develop before the victim is already gone. At lower doses, the effects are not immediately fatal, but can still cause lasting damage to the lungs, the eyes, and the central nervous system. Survivors of sublethal exposure have reported chronic vision problems, persistent respiratory issues, and neurological symptoms years after the event. And because sarin is extraordinarily volatile, meaning it evaporates from a liquid into an invisible gas very quickly at room temperature, it can blanket an enclosed space before anyone even knows it has been released. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it. By the time you feel the first symptom, the constricting of your pupils, it is already inside you. By mid-1939, Schrader had delivered the formula for sarin to the German Army Weapons Office at the Spandau Citadel in Berlin, where military chemists immediately began studying how to produce it at scale and how to weaponize it. The Nazis built pilot plants and constructed a massive production facility at a forested site called Raubkammer near the city of Munster. There, they tested aerial bombs containing Tabun and found that dispersing the liquid as a fine mist was the deadliest delivery method. At the same time, a full-scale Tabun factory went up at Diehenfurth, eventually producing thousands of tons of the nerve agent. Sarin production moved slower, and by the end of the war, Germany had produced somewhere between 500 kilograms and 10 tons, far less than the Tabun stockpile, but still enough to fill artillery shells. Both agents were loaded into munitions and stored, ready for deployment. And yet, despite all of this preparation, Adolf Hitler never gave the order to use them. This is one of the strangest contradictions of the Second World War. The regime that was systematically murdering millions of people in gas chambers using Zyklon B refused to deploy nerve agents against Allied soldiers on the battlefield. Historians have debated why for decades. Some point to Hitler's personal experience with chemical weapons in the trenches of World War I, where he was temporarily blinded by a British mustard gas attack, and argue he feared retaliation in kind. Others note that Germany's blitzkrieg strategy relied on rapid tank and infantry advances, and dropping nerve agents on the same ground your own soldiers were about to march into would have been self-defeating. There is also evidence that German intelligence badly overestimated Allied chemical capabilities. The Nazis believed the British and Americans had already developed their own nerve agents and would strike back with equal force. That turned out to be completely wrong. The Allies had no idea nerve agents even existed until the war ended. And that brings us to one of the most alarming moments of the entire conflict. When Allied forces swept into Germany in 1945, they discovered the stockpiles. British and American soldiers found warehouses full of Tabun-filled munitions, production records for sarin, and the scientists who had built the entire program. Soviet forces captured the factory at Diehenfurth and seized everything they could haul east. The reaction on all sides was the same. Both halves of the emerging Cold War recognized what they had found, and the race to build nerve agent arsenals of their own began almost overnight. The British established a chemical weapons testing program at Porton Down, a military research facility on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. The Americans launched parallel programs at several sites. Both nations began producing sarin in bulk. Both began testing it on animals and on human subjects who did not always fully understand what they had volunteered for. In 1953, a 20-year-old Royal Air Force engineer named Ronald Madison arrived at Porton Down to participate in what he was told were tests related to curing the common cold. Volunteers received a small payment for their time, and Madison planned to use the money to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend. On May 6th, technicians applied 200 milligrams of liquid sarin to a patch of cloth taped to Madison's forearm. Within minutes, he began sweating. His breathing became labored. He started convulsing on the floor. 45 minutes later, Ronald Madison was dead. He was 20 years old, and he never knew what killed him. The inquest, held in secret, returned a verdict of misadventure. The case was classified and buried. But in 2004, more than 50 years later, the case was reopened after a campaign by Madison's family. A jury examined the evidence and ruled that Madison had been unlawfully killed by the application of a nerve agent in a non-therapeutic experiment. He was not the only person harmed at Porton Down, but his death remains the most documented case of a government testing sarin on its own citizens. Meanwhile, the Cold War nerve agent arms race kept escalating on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The United States produced sarin at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal just outside Denver, Colorado, where workers manufactured the nerve agent alongside conventional pesticides in neighboring buildings. Additional production took place at facilities in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. At the same time, American researchers moved beyond sarin entirely and developed an even deadlier compound called VX, which was 10 times more toxic and far more persistent in the environment. The Soviet Union ran its own parallel programs, producing a VX variant along with massive quantities of sarin and soman. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, both superpowers manufactured tens of thousands of tons of nerve agents, loading them into artillery shells, aerial bombs, spray tanks, and rocket warheads. The United States alone stockpiled over 30,000 tons of chemical weapons at various points during the Cold War. The logic mirrored the one that governed nuclear weapons: deterrence through the threat of mutual destruction. Neither side was eager to be the first to cross the line, because both knew what the other side would send back. And just like with nuclear weapons, the unsettling question was never whether these agents could be used, it was whether the people who controlled them would one day decide to. But sarin did not stay locked inside the arsenals of superpowers, and the places where it was actually used against human beings would be far from any Cold War frontline. On the morning of March 16, 1988, in the final months of the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi warplanes appeared in the sky above the Kurdish city of Halabja in northern Iraq. Halabja had a population of about 60,000 people. 2 days earlier, the city had been captured by Iranian forces and Kurdish Peshmerga fighters allied against Saddam Hussein's regime. The Iraqi military decided to respond with overwhelming force. First came conventional bombs, exploding across residential neighborhoods, shattering windows and collapsing the doors and walls of homes. This was calculated. The conventional bombardment drove civilians underground, into basements and makeshift air raid shelters where they thought they would be safe. Then the Iraqi jets returned. Around 11 in the morning, some 16 MiG and Mirage aircraft swooped low over Halabja and dropped a different kind of munition. Canisters containing a mixture of mustard gas, cyanide, and the nerve agents, Sarin, Tabun, and VX. The chemicals, heavier than air, sank through the broken windows and doorways, flowing like invisible water into the same shelters where families had taken cover. People began suffocating within minutes. Parents died holding their children. Entire families were found frozen in their last positions, skin blistered, eyes open, mouths still forming the shapes of screams that were never heard. Between 3,200 and 5,000 people were killed in the Halabja massacre, most of them women and children. Another 7,000 to 10,000 were injured, many with permanent damage to their lungs, eyes, and nervous systems that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Survivors described the gas as smelling faintly of apples and garlic, and many said the first sign of the attack was a strange, sweet scent drifting through the broken windows of their homes. Within minutes, people were vomiting, going blind, and losing control of their bodies. The attack was carried out under the command of Ali Hassan al-Majid, the military officer who became known to the world as Chemical Ali. He was later convicted and executed for these crimes. Halabja was part of a broader genocidal campaign called the Anfal, which destroyed over 4,000 Kurdish villages and killed an estimated 180,000 people between 1987 and 1988. Photographs from the aftermath were published around the world, showing rows of bodies in the streets, a Kurdish father clutching his infant daughter as both lay dead on the ground, entire neighborhoods emptied of life. These images shocked the international community, but geopolitics won out over outrage. The United States, which had been backing Iraq against Iran throughout the war, issued diplomatic protests, but took no meaningful action. No international tribunal was convened. No economic sanctions were imposed. The message sent was unmistakable, even if unintentional. Chemical weapons could be used against civilians, and the world would condemn the act, but do very little to punish the perpetrators. That lack of consequences would echo across the Pacific. In Japan, a doomsday cult called Shinrikyo had been building a chemical weapons program in secret. The cult's founder, a partially blind yoga instructor who called himself Shoko Asahara, had gathered thousands of followers around his apocalyptic prophecies. Shinrikyo had accumulated over $1 billion by absorbing the personal wealth of new members, and Asahara used that money to acquire weapons, including Russian military helicopters, and to build a sarin production facility at the cult's compound near the village of Kamikwishiki at the base of Mount Fuji. Their first major sarin attack came on June 27, 1994, in the city of Matsumoto. Cult members released a cloud of sarin gas from a converted refrigeration truck near a residential apartment complex where judges were living. Judges who were about to rule against Aum in a fraud case. 8 people died and around 600 were exposed. Investigators initially suspected a local man who had pesticide chemicals in his garage, and the real perpetrators went undetected for months. 9 months later, with police closing in, Asahara ordered his most ambitious strike. On the morning of March 20th, 1995, during the peak of Monday rush hour in Tokyo, 5 cult members boarded trains on 3 separate subway lines. Each carried plastic bags filled with liquid sarin, wrapped in newspaper to hide them. At a coordinated time, they punctured the bags with sharpened umbrella tips and calmly walked off the trains. The sarin began evaporating immediately. As the fumes spread through the packed subway cars, passengers started choking, coughing, and collapsing. Some vomited, others foamed at the mouth. People staggered out of trains and fell on station platforms. Subway entrances filled with bodies as commuters dragged themselves up the stairs, desperate for fresh air. First responders arrived to chaos that many later described as resembling a battlefield. 13 people died in the Tokyo subway attack. More than 5,500 were injured, many severely. Hundreds suffered long-term neurological and vision damage. Some survivors were still dealing with chronic health problems decades later. Japanese police traced the attack to Shinrikyo within days. Raids on the cult's compound uncovered chemical laboratories, barrels of sarin precursors, and plans for attacks using anthrax and other biological agents. Asahara was arrested in May 1995, found hiding in a concealed room. He was convicted in 2004 and sentenced to death. In July 2018, he and 12 other members were executed by hanging. The Tokyo subway attack proved something that security agencies around the world had feared but never confronted directly. A non-state group, a cult with no military training and no government backing, had manufactured and deployed a weapon of mass destruction in one of the most advanced, most densely populated cities on the planet. The sarin used that morning was not even high purity. Experts later estimated it was only about 30% pure because Orm's chemists had rushed production. If the cult had taken more time and produced weapons-grade sarin, the death toll could have been orders of magnitude higher. That fact haunted intelligence agencies. Subway systems, airports, shopping centers, and enclosed public spaces around the world were suddenly understood as soft targets in a way they had never been before. Governments from Washington to London to Moscow began wargaming scenarios involving chemical attacks on civilian infrastructure. The assumption that nerve agents were safely locked inside government arsenals and would only ever be used on battlefields, died on a train platform in Tokyo on a Monday morning. But the next chapter of Sarin's history would come from a government, not a cult. And it would prove that even with international treaties in place, the weapon could still find its way to the front lines of a modern war. During the Syrian civil war, the regime of President Bashar al-Assad turned chemical weapons against opposition-held neighborhoods on multiple occasions. The deadliest attack came on August 21, 2013, when rockets carrying sarin struck multiple areas in the Ghouta suburbs of Damascus. The assault happened in the early morning hours, while families slept. Sarin-filled munitions hit the towns of Zamalka and Ain Tama in East Ghouta and Moadamia in West Ghouta. Families were killed in their beds. Those who ran for basements found that the gas, heavier than air, had pooled in the lowest rooms of their buildings, turning shelters into death traps. Over 1,100 people were killed in the Ghouta attack, according to the Syrian Network for Human Rights, including 99 children and 194 women. Nearly 6,000 more suffered respiratory symptoms and suffocation from sarin exposure. Medical workers who reached the affected areas describe victims experiencing violent convulsions, foaming at the mouth, and total loss of muscle control. Field hospitals were overwhelmed within minutes, and many lacked the medicines and oxygen supplies needed to treat nerve agent exposure. The United Nations sent a team of investigators who confirmed that surface-to-surface rockets loaded with sarin had been used on a massive scale against civilian neighborhoods. In the aftermath, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 2118, demanding that Syria destroy its chemical weapons program. Under international pressure, Syria formally joined the Chemical Weapons Convention in September 2013 and began declaring its chemical weapons stockpiles for destruction under OPCW supervision. The world took a collective breath. Inspectors arrived. Chemicals were shipped out of the country for disposal. Maybe this time the line would hold. It did not hold. On the morning of April 4, 2017, Syrian government warplanes struck the town of Khan Shaykhun in Idlib province with bombs that the OPCW would later confirm contained sarin. The attack came in the early hours. More than 80 people were killed, at least 30 of them children. Hundreds more were injured. Videos and photographs from the scene spread across social media within hours, showing images that were nearly impossible to process. Children convulsing on hospital floors, their small bodies shaking uncontrollably. Fathers carrying dead infants through the rubble. Rescue workers from the white helmets collapsing from secondary contamination as they tried to save survivors. A man named Abdul Hamid Youssef lost his wife, his 11-month-old twins, his 2 brothers, and his cousin, all in a single morning. When asked about it later, he said he had lost the most precious people in his life. The attack drew immediate international outrage. The United States responded by launching 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at the Shayrat Air Base, which American intelligence assessed was the origin of the sarin strike. A joint UN and OPCW investigation later concluded that the Syrian government was directly responsible for the sarin release at Khan Shaykhun. The story of sarin, from its creation in that laboratory in Wuppertal-Elberfeld to its use against sleeping families in the suburbs of Damascus, traces an arc that is difficult to face directly. A chemist trying to kill aphids stumbled onto a substance so toxic that 0.5 milligram, a speck you could barely see, can end a human life. That substance was seized by the Nazis, stockpiled by superpowers, deployed against Kurdish villages, released in a Tokyo subway car, and dropped from warplanes onto Syrian neighborhoods. Each time, the world expressed horror. Each time, leaders and diplomats said never again. The effort to put this weapon back in the box has been long and imperfect. The Chemical Weapons Convention was opened for signature on January 13, 1993, and entered into force on April 29, 1997. Today, 193 countries are members, making it one of the most widely adopted arms control agreements in history. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, headquartered in The Hague, oversees compliance and has conducted hundreds of inspections. In July 2023, the OPCW announced a milestone that decades of work had been building toward. All declared chemical weapons stockpiles around the world had been verified as destroyed. Over 72,000 metric tons of chemical agents eliminated. But declared is the word that carries all the weight. The Syrian conflict proved that governments can hide stockpiles and keep producing chemical weapons outside the treaty framework. Enforcement remains the weak point. The OPCW can investigate, but it cannot force compliance. The UN Security Council can authorize action, but vetoes by permanent members have repeatedly blocked accountability when it mattered most. Gerhard Schrader died in 1990 at the age of 87. After the war, when British intelligence tried to recruit him to continue developing chemical weapons in the United Kingdom, Schrader turned them down. In a letter, he wrote that he was glad to be fully engaged again in the field of plant protection. He went back to Bayer and spent the rest of his career doing what he had always wanted to do, developing agricultural chemicals to protect crops. He never publicly discussed his role in creating nerve agents at length, and he lived long enough to see his accidental invention used to kill thousands of civilians in Kurdistan. The knowledge he left behind, though, cannot be unwritten. Shinrikyo proved in 1995 that a non-state group with enough money, a motivated chemist, and a converted building can produce sarin outside of any government program. The precursor chemicals are commercially available. The synthesis procedures exist in published scientific literature. No treaty can erase what is already known. The question the world has been wrestling with since 1938 is not whether sarin can be eliminated. It is whether the systems built to prevent its use are strong enough to hold against the next government, or the next group, that decides the rules no longer apply to them. Halabja, Tokyo, Ghouta, and Khan Shaykhun each gave us an answer. And so far, the answer keeps changing. If this video gave you something to think about, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Drop a comment with what topic you want covered next.